What's up, New Hope Church? It is so good to be with you guys this morning, and we are so glad to be with you guys. Hey, I know school is back in session, and parents, I don't know how you guys are feeling with your kids back in school. Some of you might miss your kids because they've been home for the last 3 months or so, or maybe you're kind of glad to get them out of the house and get them back into school and into a place where they can be throughout the weekdays. But let us know in the comments how you're feeling about back to school. We'd love to hear from you guys. And hey, if you are new, if this is your first time tuning in with us, we would love to just get to know you. And we'd love to hear your story. You can go to newhope.online and fill out an online connection card. We would just love to get to know you.
Yes, that's so good. Here at New Hope, we believe that giving is worship, that it brings joy, and that it truly makes a difference. And at newhope.online, it's kind of our hub for the online campus. You know, it's got all the information you need. But if you feel the call to give today, that is the link that you're going to want to click on to do so. We just want to thank you for your generosity or continued generosity as we're building this campus. And so we're just excited to be on this mission with you.
Yeah, that's so good, Savannah. Well, hey, we are in week 2 of our new series called God at Work, and it's all about the biblical importance of work. And I really enjoyed last week's sermon, and I gleaned and learned so much, so many new concepts just about work and the importance of biblical work from a biblical standpoint. And so I'm just really excited for Pastor Rodney to bring the word this morning and to continue to dive into that series.
Yes, well, we just want to remind you guys one more time about we're active on our social media accounts, and on Facebook and YouTube there are actually past messages and previous worship videos that you can maybe rewatch or send to someone so they can watch them for the first time. But also our app is downloadable on the App Store or on Google Play, and so we just want to make sure you guys have those resources. They are available to you.
Yeah, that's good, Savannah. Well, hey, I'm so excited for our service today. I know Pastor Rodney is going to have a great word for us today as we continue our series as God at Work. So New Hope, enjoy.
Held everything together and washed the shadow. I stood tall and I have crumbled in the same way. I have wrestled and I have trembled toward surrender. Just my heart adrift and drifted home again. Blessing till I've been desperate to find redemption. Every time I turn around, oh, you're still. I was found before I was lost. I was yours before I was not. Grace to spare for all my mistakes, and that part just wrecks me. And I know I don't deserve this kind of love, but somehow this kind of love is who you are. It's a grace I could never have, to be somebody you still want. Somehow you love me as you find me. faithful. I think you don't need a single thing until you want my heart. I was found before I was lost. I was yours before I was not. You bear the scars for all my mistakes, and that punch just wrecks me. And I know I don't deserve this kind of love, but somehow this kind of love is who you are. It's grace I can never add to be somebody you still want. Somehow you love me as you find me. You love me as you find me. Yeah. Your love's too good to leave me here. 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 If you want my heart, I won't second guess, 'cause I need your love more than anything. 'Cause I'm yours, your love's too good to leave me here. If you want my heart, I won't second guess, 'cause I need your love more than anything. 'Cause I'm yours, your love's too good to leave me here. Your love's too good to leave me here. I know I don't deserve this kind of love. Somehow this kind of love is who you are. It's a grace I can never add to be somebody you still want. Somehow you love me as you find me.
Well, hey, online campus, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm so glad that you're tuning in and that you are at church with us here online. We're going to be diving into week 2 of our series entitled God at Work. And if you were with us last week, then you remember we mentioned that we spend approximately 60% of our lives working, whether that's being an employee, whether that's being a student in this season of your life, or maybe you're a stay-at-home parent. That's a significant amount of time, right? And so the question then really is, how can we reflect the character and the hope of Jesus wherever we are in the settings where we work and spend our time? In fact, the big idea for this series is this, that work is a part of the original plan that God has designed for us to shape our character, to reflect His character, His imago Dei, the image of God, and it's intended to partner us with God to be a blessing to other people. And so throughout this series, we're looking at things like we are looking at the calling that God has for our lives. We're looking at how God uses our work to develop our character, and we're going to look at what it means to be on mission with God. So those are messages that are coming up, and some of the ways that we can accomplish this big idea. But today I'm excited as we're going to take some time to specifically talk about the Sabbath. And I don't think it's a secret that we live in a day and a culture that is in a constant state of go, 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 a constant state of wanting more, needing more information, needing more engagement, needing more content, more productivity, more things, more this, more that. And so I recently read that in the United States alone, we have enough square footage of storage units that we could house the world's homeless population. That is just absolutely unreal, right? We are such a culture of more. It was John D. Rockefeller who at one time was the world's most wealthiest person, and he was responsible for 1% of the United States economy, the money that made up the U.S. economy. That's what he had. It was his. It belonged to him. And he was asked one time how much money is enough, and his response was just a little bit more, right? And that, I think, sums up our culture, right? This is the drive to constantly push for more. One more thing to upgrade, one more trip to go on, one more Netflix series to binge watch, right? And it can be exhausting. And it just reminds me of this quote that I heard from John Ortberg, who said, "For many of us, the great danger is not that we'll renounce our faith. It's that we'll become so distracted and rushed and preoccupied that we'll settle for a mediocre version of it. We'll just skim our lives instead of actually living them." And so here's the thing. We can't afford to be distracted. We have to be focused people. We've got to slow down our pace and slow down our wants and our desire for more. Our team recently read the book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. It's a great book. I would recommend it. But in that book, he talks about how it was predicted in the past that by now we would only be working about 20 to 30 hours a week at the most, that we would have figured out how to automate things and find more time to rest and vacation. That was the prediction, at least. But we know that the opposite's true, right? That today, people are chasing work more than ever before. And in an era that touts freedom, we're more tied to our jobs than we've ever had to be. And so what is God's solution to help us? It's the Sabbath. Now, I know that the word Sabbath isn't used a lot in our daily vocabulary. It's not something that you use a lot at school or at work, but what does the Sabbath really mean? It means by definition to stop, to rest, and to delight. The Sabbath, like the tithe, takes discipline and it takes intentionality on our part, and it declares to ourselves and it declares to God that a well-ordered life with less is more fulfilling than and more sustainable than a disoriented life with more. And so just to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting the Sabbath, understand I'm not talking about just a day off, okay? It's a fiercely protected time that's dedicated to rest and it's dedicated to worship. And so it's not the day that we do errands. It's not the time that we use to catch up on our emails or work our side hustle, but it's a time that we set aside for our spirit to rest, for our spirit to delight in God. In fact, the Sabbath isn't just a suggestion, but we also see that it's one of the 10 commandments that God has given us. And it's interesting that the actual wording in Exodus 20 and verse number 8 says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy." Now, when I read the word remember as I was studying for this message, I was tempted to ask, why does God want us to remember the Sabbath unless he just knows we're going to be tempted to forget it, right? You'd think we would all be chomping at the bit to have a day off that's full of delight and life-giving things, and then here we find ourselves in 2022 struggling to remember to stop and to rest and to delight. And so during our time together, I want us to look at this question: what does God want us to know about the Sabbath? And I want to give you some thoughts today about the Sabbath that I think will help our understanding. And then in the end, what I want to do is give you a few tips on how to protect and be intentional about your Sabbath, okay? So the first thing I want us to do, though, is I want us to look back to the Garden of Eden. It's where we were at last week. We're going to look back to the beginning, to the time when Adam and Eve were just newly formed. God had just made them. shaped them in his own image. And so if you have a Bible and you want to look there, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 2. And in a minute, we'll be in verses 1 through 3. Now, again, if you don't have anything to read with, I'll read it and we'll walk through it together. But as we do, if you're taking notes, I want to give you this first thought, this first thing that I want us to understand about the Sabbath. And it's this, that the Sabbath is an act of design. It's an act of design. Now, I already know what some of you are thinking, because I tend to think like you do, okay? You're thinking, Pastor Rodney, wait. This is a series called God at Work, right? And you're talking about the Sabbath today, and this doesn't feel like it really connects, right? Work, Sabbath, like Sabbath is not work, right? But I want you to see how this fits in this series and why it's so important. And so let's look at Genesis chapter 2 together, and then I'll explain. It says, "So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation." Now, I don't know if you caught this, and I've got to be honest with you, it wasn't that long ago that I realized this fact, that Genesis tells us that God created for 5 days before he created Adam and Eve, right? He created them on the sixth day. And then on the seventh day was when he rested. And so Adam and Eve's first day after their birth in the garden was the day that God rested. Think about that. It was the Sabbath. It was the day of rest. And so now we read last week that God clearly had a plan for Adam and Eve, right? A plan to work, a plan for them to rule over the birds of the air, over the plants and the trees, over the animals that scurry across the ground. However, I want you to notice that before they ever did any work, the first thing that they were to do was to rest. On the seventh day, they were to rest. The creation story shows us that if we don't have a healthy pattern of rest, then we can never have healthy rhythms of work. We have to remember that we don't work so we can rest. We rest so we can work. And I love what A.J. Sabota said in his book, Subversive Sabbath, about this particular moment here in the creation story. He said, humanity at this point had only God's goodness to celebrate and nothing more. Work had not even begun. The Sabbath teaches us that we do not work to please God, but rather we rest because God is always pleased with the work that he has accomplished in us. And I love that. We don't work to please God. He's already pleased because we're his sons and daughters. If you want to a little bit of a recap on that, I would encourage you to go back to last week's message and listen to that misconception that we often have about that work gives me value, because the reality is that work doesn't give you value. God and who he says you are is where your value is derived and your identity comes from. And so you already need to know he's pleased with you because you are his creation. You're his son or you're his daughter. And so in the same way that our work partners with God and honors him, our rest matters to him as well. And so we see very clearly that the Sabbath is by design a part of God's plan for us. The second thing that I want you to see today is that the Sabbath is an act of dependence. Once again, I want you to hear the words of Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, that says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." Now let's just be honest. Productivity is seductive. It calls to us because it feels good to produce. It feels good to accomplish things. It was Mary Bell who said this: "Achievement is the alcohol of our time. Work is our drug, our numbing agent, escape hatch, and anesthetizing behavior. Achievement makes us feel the semblance of some glow of heightened, idolized identity where we are, she says, what we do. In this modern world, we have become addicts to doing, making, producing, and accomplishing. But when we take the time to stop and we take matters out of our own hands and we place them in God's, and we take the time to trust the Lord, I want us to know it's a holy thing. Sabbath is a holy thing. The Sabbath really is an act of dependence. If you can honor the Sabbath, then you are saying you can trust God. You can trust Him. We declare to the Lord through the Sabbath that He can accomplish in our lives more in 6 days of work with 1 day of rest than we can on our own with 7 days working. And so it requires us to trust God and to provide for us and to care for us. And it's hard for us to stop a day of productivity, right? It's hard for us to just slow down, but we have to learn that there are projects that are going to sometimes have to be paused. That your desk is going to sometimes pile up and you're going to leave and you're not going to be able to get to it the next day. That there are times that as the Sabbath rolls around, your to-do list is not going to be complete and you're going to have to wait to get back to it, and that's okay. There's a book in New Zealand, it's called the New Zealand Prayer Book, and it has a prayer in it called Night Prayer. And one stanza reads this way. It says, "It's night after a long day. What has been done has been done. What has not been done has not been done. Let it be." You know, and it reminds me of the people of Israel. Just after they left Egypt, they were wandering in the wilderness, and you know, they were waiting for their moment to cross into the Jordan and into the promised land that God had for them. And while they were in the wilderness, God provided food for them by raining it down from heaven, right? It was called manna, and it was something that they would go out and they would collect, and they could pack it together and bake it or boil it, and it would have been just like a sweet bread for them to eat. And each day, they were commanded to go and collect enough for that day, for each person. And they were told not to get any more than what they could eat or what they could use. However, the manna only rained down from the sky for 6 days. It didn't fall on the Sabbath. And so they were told on the day before, on the 6th day, to go and collect twice as much so that they would have enough for the next day. And so I want you to listen to it. Exodus chapter 16, verses 21 through 23. It says, "After this, the people gathered the food morning by morning, each family according to its need. And as the sun became hot, the flakes that they had not picked up melted and disappeared." How cool would that have been to see? "And then on the 6th day, they gathered twice as much as usual, 4 quarts for each person instead of 2. Then all the leaders of the community came and asked Moses for an explanation. And he told them, 'This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow will be a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath day set apart for the Lord. So bake or boil as much as you want today and set aside what is left for tomorrow.'" You want to talk about trust, right? You want to talk about dependence on God, that He would provide for them and take care of them. And, you know, as Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, we need to do the same. We need to trust in the Lord with all of our hearts and lean not on our own understanding, but in all of our ways, acknowledge Him and submit to Him, and He will be the one that makes our path straight. After all, the Sabbath is trusting God enough to stop doing what we're doing and to spend time delighting in Him. And if we can be real, the Sabbath is ultimately about relationship. It's about prioritizing and setting aside time to be with Jesus. And this is the hard thing because, you know, we're busy people. We have work, we have ball games to go to, birthday parties to take our kids to, social events, and it just seems like life is a constant go, 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 right? But the Sabbath is designed to draw us back to a meeting place with God, a place where we can rest and we can recharge and have the strength that we need to do the things that He's purposed for us to do. And so honoring the Sabbath is an act of design. It's an act of dependence. And the third thing I want you to see today is that Sabbath is an act of defiance. How many rebels that we have watching, right? Just go ahead and hit the thumbs up, the hearts, right? All my rebels. Yeah, I knew it. I knew I loved this group of people because, you know, that's what the Sabbath is. It is an act of defiance. In the words of Pastor Brady Boyd, in a book that he wrote called Addicted to Busy, he says, "We are a culture of people who are addicted to being busy," right? And Sabbathing is a way of pushing back against the culture in which we live in. We live in a society that teaches that we are what we produce. And it teaches that we have to burn the wick at both ends, right? If we're going to be effective people. But the Sabbath is countercultural. It's a way of pumping the brakes and slowing down and setting a rhythm for our lives that's sustainable, because we're not in a sprint, but we're in a marathon, right? That's what life is more like. It's more like a marathon. Boyd says this too. He says, the more rested we are, the less we're driven by what others think. The more rested you are, the more you're driven by what God alone believes to be true. I love John Eldridge said this: taking care of our hearts is the first blow against the enemy's schemes. So we have to take the time to Sabbath. It's countercultural. It pushes against the norms. It's more than just a passive action. It's a way of combating the enemy who is out to destroy our lives. And we need to slow down to rest. One of my favorite stories is about two men who were out in the forest, and they were challenging one another to a competition to see who could cut down the most trees in a day. They agreed they would start in the morning, they would finish sometime in the afternoon, and at the end they would count up the trees, and the winner would be the one who had fallen the most trees. The first lumberjack started out working hard, and he only stopped for a brief lunch, and he got back to his work and continued on, and he started out to a big lead, and as he worked feverishly, he looked over from time to time and saw his opponent sitting down to rest. And he smirked and he thought, you know what, I'm going to blow away this guy. Like, I'm going to beat him so badly because he just keeps stopping. But at the end of the day, when the time came for them to stop and the competition was over, they went and they began to count up the number of fallen trees. And the second woodsman had cut down more trees, actually, than the first. And amazed, he went to his opponent and he said, how can this be? Every time I looked over at you, you were stopping to rest. To which his opponent replied, what you also didn't notice was that every time I had sat down to rest, I took the time to sharpen my axe. You see, if you have a dull axe, it doesn't matter how hard you keep going. Eventually, your progress is going to slow down because you're not as sharp. But if you take the time to stop and rest and sharpen your axe. And you know what? When the Sabbath happens, yes, you're flying in the face of culture and you're slowing down, but you're also sharpening yourself and you're making yourself better, and you're going to have a better chance of crossing the finish line and not burning out if you take the time to Sabbath and take the time to rest. So Sabbath is an act of defiance, and to which I say, viva la resistance, right? Like, let's fly in the face of our culture that says, keep going, keep working hard, don't stop, and let's take the time to stop. I love Romans 12:1 and 2, and it reminds us this: therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to present your body as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. And then hear this part very loud and clear. Do not be conformed any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind. And then you'll be able to test and approve what His will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. You know, what I was thinking about when I read that passage of Scripture, it's not necessarily talking about the Sabbath, but it so much applies. Don't be conformed to the pattern of this world and the thinking of this world that says you got to keep going and you got to burn the wick at both ends. But instead, be transformed. How? By resting and the renewing of your mind. And so here's one last little bonus thought that I want to share with you about Sabbath, and I always like bonus points because the Sabbath day is important because it's blessed. Exodus 20 and verse 11 says that God blessed the Sabbath and He made it holy. And I don't know about you, but I want God's blessing on my life. And if we want to be blessed, then we need to honor the Sabbath. And when we do, I love the words of Walter Brueggemann. He says this: people who keep the Sabbath live all 7 days differently. When you honor the Sabbath and you keep it consistently, I promise that it will produce change in your life. So will you trust Him? Will you trust Him with the Sabbath? Going back to the question that we've been looking at together, what does God want us to know about the Sabbath? Well, honoring the Sabbath is more than just a matter of self-preservation, but rather it's a radical and regular reorientation towards the priorities and the sovereignty of God. The Sabbath is an act of design, it is an act of dependence, and it is an act of defiance against the patterns of this world. And so as promised, as we wrap up, I want to give you a couple of quick tips to keeping the Sabbath. And you may want to write these down too. And we're just going to take like 3 minutes on these. But number one, live within your means so that you don't have to work all 7 days. Remember that less is sometimes more, and more sometimes creates a more hurried and a more hectic pace for your life because you got to maintain it. You got to keep up with it. So live within your means. Secondly, set boundaries for your Sabbath to only do things that are life-giving and things that will recharge you. Things like worship and eating good food and playing and spending time with family and friends. And leave the chores, leave the to-do list to the other 6 days of the week. Thirdly, I want to encourage you to plan and prepare for the Sabbath. Remember that Israel had to go and collect manna the day before and set it aside so they would have food to eat on the Sabbath day. Prepare for your Sabbath in advance. My dream for you, my hope for you is that you get into a rhythm in your life that you start to anticipate and get excited about the Sabbath so that when Friday rolls around, Saturday rolls around, if Sunday is your Sabbath, then you go, it's coming. I'm going to get ready for it. I'm going to start to rest. I'm going to start to, think about what I'm going to do that's going to be fun, that's not work, and it's going to be family oriented, and it's going to be worship filled, and it's going to be great. And then the fourth thing is this: find someone to hold you accountable to keeping the Sabbath. Give permission to a friend. Give permission to, someone that you love and you trust. If you're married, be an accountability partner with your spouse and hold each other to Sabbathing and doing it in a healthy way, not as a way of coming down on each other, but supporting each other and lifting each other up. And here's what I hope those 4 things help you, and there's, I'm sure, other things that you could do, but the key is to be intentional, because if left to our own human tendencies, I know this about myself, we're going to be tempted to drift away from the Sabbath and keep busy and keep doing things, but we've got to fight to keep it on the calendar and to keep it important in our lives. So today I want us to look at a couple of takeaways. And, as you're watching today, maybe you would just say, you know what, I need rest in my spirit. I need rest in my heart. And, the Bible is very clear about a relationship with Jesus brings rest to us from that constant feelings of guilt and shame and so if you're watching today and you're experiencing that unrest in your heart, that unsettledness, it could be because you don't have a walk with Jesus, a relationship with Him. And if that's you today, I want to lead you in a prayer where you could start that journey and say yes to Jesus. And so if that's you, you could pray something like this with me. Jesus, today I want to begin a relationship with you. Thank you for going to the cross and dying for me. I want to spend eternity with you. I confess you're my Lord and my Savior, and I invite you into my life. And I ask that you would lead me and guide me and help me to live my life with purpose for you. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. If that was you, I want you to know we celebrate you and we're excited that you said yes to Jesus, and someone wants to know, right? We want to hear about it, and I want to know, and I want you to reach out to our team and communicate that to us, whether that's right now in the comments or in a direct message later on. You could go to newhope.online and connect that way. And what that is a card that you could fill out digitally that comes to us, and then someone is gonna reply back and connect with you. Because again, we want to go on this journey with you. We're so excited for you. But maybe you're watching this too, and maybe for you it's it's not necessarily about making a decision to follow Jesus because you said yes to Jesus, but maybe you'd say, this message where it really has challenged me, where the Sabbath has really challenged me, is that I tend to spend my life chasing after more things, more things to fulfill my life, and we all know this, that nothing is satisfying. Nothing will ever will be enough to completely satisfy us and make us happy, and so what God is doing is showing you that the void that you feel and experience as you continually chase these things is something that only He can fill. And you need the Sabbath. You need to spend some time with Him and delight in Him. Maybe you say, I'm going to be intentional about Sabbathing this next week. Or maybe you would say, I haven't lived with a good margin. I haven't had good boundaries in my life. And you say, I'm going to learn to say no to some things. I'm going to learn to say no in order to move towards a more boundary-filled life. I don't know what it is that God's speaking to you about, but we'd love to know. again, I'd love to hear if you want to go to newhope.online and message us in the connection card there, or direct message us. We'd love to know, because you matter, and you're more than just people who are jumping on to a live stream and watching. You're a church family, and we want to hear from you. And so, hey, again, this has been a great time together to worship today, to look at God's Word. And next week, we're going to dive into another segment of this God at Work series where we can see how He's working in our lives. But I just want to really challenge you this week to find time to Sabbath, to rest, to get alone with Jesus. And until next week, I hope you have an incredible week, and that God uses you at your work, because you know what? There's a calling on your life wherever you are. He's going to use you in a mighty way. But until then, we'll see you next week. We love you. Have a great week. God bless you, New Hope.